Thank you very much, Alex, for those remarks and for the important work that Unity Productions Foundation does. Now to our panel. A couple of very simple, obvious ground rules. As advertised, we invite you to ask the hard questions, questions that you may have or questions you've heard from other people about Muslims, about Islam, about Muslims and Islam in the United States. So I hope you understand everything is on the table, from First Amendment questions about Sharia law and the courts to theological questions about Muslim beliefs and practices. In the interest of time, of course, please try to ask brief questions and to not make long speeches. And of course, we all need to remember to be civil as we engage in some of these difficult issues. However we may disagree, we need to, of course, strive to treat each other in this country with civility and respect. You may ask questions in the microphones provided in the aisles, or if that's too intimidating, just ask for an index card and you can write your question and we'll collect those and try to get to as many of those as possible. I think there'll be obviously, there are Ashley's over there and they'll have a bucket of these cards and you can just indicate when you want one. We'll also be taking questions from our online audience and we'll try to get some of those in. And again, the hashtag is Truth on Islam if you're tweeting. You have bios of the panel, so I'm not going to get into deep introductions to all our wonderful panel, but I'll just briefly tell you who's here. Rabbi Marc Schneier is the founder and president of the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding, and he's internationally known, and he has been widely honored for his extraordinary efforts to promote interfaith understanding and dialogue. It's a real privilege to have him with us. Asma Uddin is an attorney at the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty here in Washington, D.C., and she's also a fellow at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. She's all over the internet, in a good way, as an outstanding commentator and a blogger. And her scholarship breaks new ground on some of the difficult questions that we're going to actually tackle tonight. Haroon Moghul is a doctoral student at Columbia University, and he's also a fellow at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. He's an outstanding scholar and an award-winning blogger. Haroon is widely acknowledged as an emerging leader in the Muslim American community. At one point, some group said that you were one of the 500 future leaders of tomorrow among Muslims, and I think out of 1.5 billion, that's pretty good. 500. That's very good. Melissa Rogers directs the Center for Religion and Public Affairs at Wake Forest University, and as one of America's leading religious liberty attorneys, her insights and expertise help to shape public policy at the White House, in the courts, and on Capitol Hill. So we have an outstanding panel to discuss any of the issues that you would like to bring up. I'm only going to ask one general question just to warm us up, and then I am really going to turn it over to you and to our online audience. This is the question that I get most commonly whenever I write a column that has anything positive in it about Muslims or Islam, whether in the United States or just in general. And so this is what I'm paraphrasing. I'm giving you the polite version of what many of my readers write to me. Something like this. Many of them say, I'd like to believe what you say about Muslims and Islam, but don't we actually have good reasons to be distrustful, fearful? After all, look at all of the radical Muslim groups in the world. Look at the acts of terror committed by people in the name of Islam. Look at the oppression that takes place in many Muslim countries. Look at the conflicts they're having in Europe over Islam and Muslims. Doesn't that all add up? Doesn't that all somehow demonstrate that Islam itself is the problem and that we should worry about the growth of Islam in the Muslim population in the United States? So that's my first question. And Rabbi Schneier, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you. And I don't know why I'm picking on you first, but I am. each of you can respond any way you would like to that question.
So the question is, look at all the radical groups. I believe that, thank God, when it comes to the world. All right, you can hear me?
There you go. Yep.
I'll lean on my right side. Not that I'm right. That when it comes to the world Muslim community, all the radical groups are fringe groups. There's no question there's an internal struggle within Islam today between the moderates and the extremists. But we find that every major religion today is confronted by extremism and fundamentalism within its midst. I find that the American Muslim community, thank you. Yeah, I'm more used to this, thank you. I find that the American Muslim community has recognized that a people who fight for their own rights are only as honorable as when they fight for the rights of all people. And I can state from a Jewish perspective how proud I am, not only of the role that the Jewish community has played in combating Islamophobia and anti-Muslim discrimination in our country, but also the role that Muslim leadership has played in fighting for the rights and in championing the causes and issues for the Jewish community as well. You know, I look out to this audience, I see my good friend here, Dr. Saeed Saeed, the Secretary General of ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America. What a great friend to the Jewish people. This is a man who has spoken out time and time again against those who seek to deny the Holocaust, or the role that ISNA has played in terms of denouncing anti-Semitism. And it simply goes on and on and on. It's in order for there to be an authentic understanding between various communities and faiths, it has to go beyond dialogue. It has to be about fighting for the other. It's about Jews fighting for Muslims. It's about Muslims fighting for Jews. It's about Christians fighting for Muslims and for Jews. Because we have to recognize that not only as the Abrahamic traditions do we share a common faith, but we share a common fate, and how our single destiny must strengthen our bonds of concern, compassion, and caring for each other. So to those who are concerned about the so-called radical groups, right? Let's generalize how all of Islam, all the radical groups, let them look at the American Muslim community. Let them point to American Muslim leadership that I, as an American Jew, can proudly state that many of these leaders are not only friends and personal friends, but they have stood in solidarity with my community, and that is what America is all about.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi. Who else wants to jump in? Do you want to go down the line on this?
Sure.
Asma, what do you want to say?
So I'm going to approach this from the perspective of First Amendment law and religious freedom generally, just because that's my background. And I know that often those who have concerns about Sharia and Islam in America, or Islam in America, are thinking about Sharia. Many of these proponents are the same ones who support the anti-Sharia initiatives in various states. And I think a starting point is to understand that, yes, we have these concerns, we might have concerns about the way Sharia is implemented or Islam is interpreted in other parts of the world. But we have to understand that the implementation, sort of the manifestation of these in the American context is going to be necessarily shaped by the American framework. And so in the context of Sharia, we have to remember that there's an existing framework that is going to constrain the application, and that the way that Sharia is applied, when it is applied, is always going to have to be conformed to American public policy. There's private arbitration panels that can use Sharia law, but ultimately, in order for Sharia arbitration awards to be enforced, you have to have civic courts enforce those judgments. And before they do that, there are certain procedural and substantive safeguards that have to be applied. The second point is, and so that's again addressing the concern. There is no, it's necessarily tempered. That fear of Islam is necessarily tempered by the fact that we have these existing safeguards. And the second point is just a lot of my work is also international and looking at, for instance, the question of religious freedom in Muslim majority countries. And the really interesting point there is that the number one victim of religiously oppressive laws are Muslims themselves. And so instead of creating this dichotomy, and the reality is it's not just Islam and Muslims versus non-Muslims and the rest of the world, it's actually very much an intra-Muslim issue, which then points to the fact that it's not really Islam that's the problem. At the end of the day, it's the political interests of the governments who are enforcing these laws and persecuting people under these laws. And finally, and just to echo the rabbi, I want to point out that yes, you can look at, the fear is based on these sort of, I guess you can say, rare or fringe cases, but it's important to also focus on the majority and to focus on all the good that's there, and that also helps to temper the fear people have of Islam and Muslims.
So I would say a few things, and being an academic, that usually means I'll talk forever.
Your mic is probably working fine, Haroon.
Yeah,
it's just, I think, Rabbi Schneier was...
All right, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
We're good. I have this light shining on my face, so it's a little bit intimidating right now, but I'll try to pretend like it's not there. The first thing I would say in response to something like that is anyone who tries to explain a historical phenomenon or a social reality or political reality through one cause may have a good book idea for the bestseller list, but is probably wrong. Nothing in the world can be explained by a single factor, whether it's our relationship with our loved ones or massive geopolitical issues and problems and strategies. The second thing I would say is that if the assumption is that Islam is the problem, we can look at Muslim communities across the West, for example, and if Islam is the only relevant factor there, then why is it that American Muslim communities are doing better than, in socioeconomic terms, Western European Muslim communities, right? If the constant is Islam, then clearly something else is at work. So to take that logic to its conclusion suggests that one is simply putting blinders on. And the final thing I would say is this view that Muslims constitute a homogeneous, monolithic, and dangerous mass has a really depressing view of humanity. If we believe, and since we're just a few days from Martin Luther King Day, that the arc of history bends in a certain direction, we see that incredibly oppressive and totalitarian systems generally do not last very long. They cause great harm, but they tend to die out. To say that this totalitarian and violent ideology has somehow captured and enslaved the minds of 1.5 billion people and has been in existence for 1,400 years plus suggests a profoundly depressing view of human existence, or a deeply disturbing view of certain types of people who are assumed to be incapable of moral thought and moral judgment.
Well, I certainly have a lot of experiences, like the rabbi referenced, of working with Muslims in America on a range of issues. And my own personal experience in that is of having Muslim groups and leaders say again and again how much they condemn violence in the name of their faith or any faith. And for us to be able to stand together on condemning violence in the name of any faith. And I've seen my Muslim friends do that again and again and seek to get that message out in any way they can. So I think these personal experiences of seeing groups of Muslim leaders condemn violence, offer up different interpretations of Sharia that are offered up sometimes in other places of the world is tremendously instructive and important. And it points to the fact that, unfortunately, there are some, as the video suggested, that would generalize and suggest that American Muslims don't condemn violence And I have a completely different experience in these groups and leaders condemning violence and holding up a vision of society that's both for America and for the world. And that vision would be one of peace, one of honoring each other's respective rights to practice our faith in peace, and going, as the rabbi said, going to bat for one another's rights. When there is a Muslim majority country, I have had them come to bat for the rights of Christians living in that Muslim majority country to practice their faith free from coercion by the government in a Muslim majority country. And in our own country, I think it's incumbent on us who are members of the Christian majority in this country to go to bat for the rights of every minority faith in our own country, including those Muslim leaders who need us so much at this time to have their back on religious freedom issues. It's also important to look, for example, at the studies that have been done. And I'm thinking of one in particular by Duke University that found that Islamic groups are so often the source of tips for police and other people who are trying to disrupt any kind of threats that have been present in our own country and have actually prevented many, many instances of questions or threats to our own countrymen. So this kind of information is so important to recognize and to disseminate to our fellow Americans during this time. I'd also just conclude by saying that I think members of every faith can relate in some way to the idea that the worst acts that are committed in our faith sometimes are used to smear the entire religion. And I could just say that as a Baptist, I had this experience most recently with the Westboro Baptist Church. The Westboro Baptist Church, as you know, goes around to military funerals and other funerals. It has said heinous things about gay people, about military service people, things that I can't repeat that are I absolutely reject and condemn. I'm a Baptist, but I do not want to be known or associated with the Westboro Baptist Church, and I condemn their actions. And I am thankful when anyone will hear me out on that point. And I think we owe Islam and Muslims the same kind of courtesy in that regard.
Thank you, Melissa. Well, I'm going to now go to you. So those of you who have a question, if you want to you either go to a mic or a card. I can't see where the cards are, but somebody has them. There they are. They're right there. If you'd rather write your question down. Otherwise, if you could just go to a mic. There's someone wants a card right here. And we'll start with the first person to get to the mic. Yes, sir.
I teach, is this working?
Yes.
In the field of Christian Muslim studies in the Washington Theological Consortium, and was invited last month to a panel at the Al Dulles area Muslim Society on the question of anti-sharia initiatives in state legislatures. It was my education into the fear and apprehension coursing around the Islamic community at this time on this subject. And so off the top of my head, I made a suggestion that wasn't well considered. Maybe it wasn't even my place to make. But in the museum, I think it might be a place to test it. I said, what if in the reporting of all this, instead of sharia, an alien word to English speakers with alien connotations, the press used the word Islamic ethics. Imam Mohammed Majid didn't like that idea very much. He said Sharia is part of our tradition, and we must not give up using the word that describes this ancient tradition. But the same thing applies when speaking of God. There's some benefit in some conversations for saying God and not Allah, because people associate odd things who are not Arab speakers or Muslim with the word Allah. So I'm asking a strategy question. I'm also asking a theological question. What about saying Muslim ethics instead of saying sharia when we're discussing this controversy?
Okay. What do you think?
Jump
I mean, I think as a starting point, maybe some of the disagreement over that phrase is because it might be limiting. Sharia is much broader than that, and there are legal components to it. And so by saying Muslim ethics or Islamic ethics, that might be unnecessarily limiting. And secondly, I mean, at the end, I mean, it seems to me the debate is constantly about Islam and Islamic values versus Judeo-Christian values. And so I think by using that frame, I wonder if we're not actually being counterproductive, because, I mean, the issue remains. I don't think it takes it away. I mean, it is a non-alien term, but at the end of the day, the concern is that there is this clash among a set of values, and I don't know if it'll solve the problem.
Yeah, I think just briefly on the use of Allah versus God. I mean, I think I'm sure there's a number of Muslims in the audience who come from South Asia or Iran or Turkey. And many of the words that Muslims from that part of the world use for religious rituals and practices are not Arabic, they're actually Persian. Because over time, when a population becomes a part of a society and feels confident in expressing its religious identity authentically, it takes on those words. I think one of the challenges for American Muslims is that a lot of these things would have happened very naturally if not for a lot of the hate and the anger. And so it produces a defensiveness that makes it harder to have some of these organic conversations. So, certain, I think, transformations that would have happened very naturally and very quickly for American Muslims who are Americans sometimes take a little bit longer, because then it becomes, I think, as Asma pointed out, and I think as Imam Majid might have been alluding to, about retaining hold on a concept and not letting it kind of become something else, or just get the argument deflected to a different kind of argument.
Yes, Mark. Could you pass Rabbi Schneier I think if you just hold on to that. Yeah.
I'm just going to hold this.
Yes, please. It's on.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. 50 years ago did not modify his language. He didn't come up with a different term for segregation, or for lynching, or for Jim Crow. And I see American Muslims today, 2012, as the civil rights struggle for this country. And it might be painful for some Americans to hear terms like Allah or Sharia, but it's also an opportunity to educate people and to sensitize people. And I'm coming from a perspective. I mean, you want to look at persecution. Let's look at 2,000 years of persecution against the Jewish people. 2,000 years of subjugation, 2,000 years of coercion, 2,000 years where we experienced the Crusades, the Inquisition, pogroms, the Holocaust. But we never modified our language, no matter what the situation was. So it may be difficult for some Americans to accept. I do not see it as the obstacle. I see it as the opportunity to educate, to expand people's horizons, and to bring greater sensitivity to this very noble Islamic tradition.
Thank you. Yes, we'll go to you.
Okay, thank you. What I would love to hear is your like a criticism, your view of something that you would like to see better within your faith. So, for instance, I don't really claim any religion. I believe there is a source greater than ourselves, that I think that love is the overriding spirit, and that we are all here to love one another. So, for instance, I was raised a Catholic, but that didn't, like I said, I don't really own a religion. But if love is the answer, then I would disagree, let's say, within Christianity, if there was anybody who was Christian who condoned war, that would be, I would have a hard time fitting that, you know, that would be a criticism of mine or a critique. And I think that in order for us to grow and evolve, we have to be capable of self-criticism. So rather than asking a question about what maybe other people might say about Islam, I'd love to hear maybe something that you think you would like to see evolve and get better. Thank you.
I guess I'll start. Well, for one, I'm actually the founder and editor of a website called altmuslima.com, and it's about discussing gender issues in Islam. And the majority of the discussion is non-scholarly. It's really just the experience of mostly American Muslims, but also Muslims from abroad, and the way that they struggle and contend with these various gender issues. And a lot of it is internal critique. It is a question of, but it's a critique not just of the sources, but also of the way they've been interpreted and applied by the community, and the repercussions mostly for women. And so I think that tradition of critique has always been there, and I think that especially in the post-9/11 America, I think that there's definitely been a greater sort of opening for the Muslim community to kind of take an internal look and begin to question things that perhaps always bothered them, but they finally kind of have a greater freedom to be able to express that. And I think Alt Muslim is one forum as it relates to gender issues. And this is to say that that type of critiquing happens quite a bit and quite often, especially among people of my generation. And I mean, one of the things that I think Alt Muslim does that is we don't kind of fall into the trap of identity politics. Haroon had mentioned the question of authenticity, and we're very careful about being authentic in our experiences and in our articulation of our critiques, of our criticism. And we don't fall into what I think a lot of Muslim Americans sometimes do, which is that this very defensive tactic of not really being public with our, so we're not airing our dirty laundry because of this need to kind of present Islam in very rosy terms. And I think one of the things that I've succeeded with at the website is to kind of move away from that and to make sure we don't fall into that trap.
Mark?
Not as a rabbi, as a Jew. I love my faith. I think it's a remarkable faith. It's a faith that gave birth to Christianity. It's a faith that gave birth to Islam. It's a faith that brought ethical monotheism to the world. And we're only 14 million people. I think it's a remarkable phenomenon. But if there was one thing that I would like to see elevated in my faith, would be people's reactions to what they consider to be the most important commandment, principle in the Torah, in the Bible. Yes, most Jews, they'll say, well, Rabbi, of course, it's love thy neighbor as thyself, right? I used to believe that, but I was wrong. See, love thy neighbor as thyself, that's mentioned once in the Torah, in the Bible. Love the stranger, that's mentioned 36 times. Is it really a challenge to love thy neighbor when it's typically your neighbor is of the same faith, the same ethnicity, looks like yourself, your children attend the same school? Is that really a challenge? Or is the real challenge is to love the stranger? Person who is of a different faith, a person who doesn't look like you. That is the real challenge, I think, and that is very much the essence of Judaism and why the Jewish people have played such an extraordinary role fighting for the rights of others. I mean, you invoked before the memory of Martin Luther King Jr.